Do you want to get into Final Fantasy VII? Maybe you've heard of Revelation and that it's coming out next year? Or maybe you've heard about the game because it won the best score at the Game Awards twice? Well, the game is a bit complicated and it's basically its own franchise. So, let me help you with a guide to Final Fantasy VII. Hey there, I'm MacLeod and today I want to explain how to play Final Fantasy VII. The order I'm about to recommend later is my opinion, of course. But I'm gonna try to mainly just explain what games there are, what other media there is, and then you can decide in the end how you want to play it. So, first I will explain what is what in the compilation, and then I will give a recommended order and also some alternatives that also make sense. I'm gonna cover the main things about all of them. I've played most of them, or read, consumed, whatever you want to say, but some I haven't, but I'm still gonna give all the important infos that I've looked up and that I know about them. So let's start with the original Final Fantasy VII, which is the 7th game in the Final Fantasy series. It was released in 1997 and it's pretty much on like all platforms at this point, because it's been ported and remastered so often that it's just pretty much everywhere now. It is not related in lore to any other Final Fantasy games because those games are usually all completely separate, if they have like different numbers, you know? Therefore you don't need to know any of the other games to play it. Same with the other 7 games, you don't need to know any other numbered games. I pretty much have a whole video on that topic, so check it out if you want to, I'll leave a link in the description. But a little bit more about the game itself. Obviously released in 1997, it is pretty retro at this point. It was one of the first games that used 3D models, so they do look very unique from today's perspective, but they do have a very real charm to them though. The combat is turn-based with a little bit of a twist, but pretty much summed up it's a turn-based combat. If you enjoy that, you'll like the combat. Next on my list, Advent Children, which is a movie released in 2005. It's on sale on a bunch of platforms like Prime or YouTube where you can rent or buy it. It's a movie sequel with amazing action, it has really good music, and I think the story is very cool for fans of the game. But it can be pretty confusing for newcomers, so I would probably say to not watch it first. However, I've heard that many people, back when it was released, got into Final Fantasy VII through the movie, so it can't be too bad. And also, as a note, there is a complete version, which was released a few years after, which I would probably recommend that if you watch the movie, watch the complete version, because it just has more content. Then there's Dirge of Cerberus, which is a sequel that actually plays even later than Advent Children. It was released in 2006, but it is only available on PlayStation 2 or emulators for said console. When it released, it got pretty mixed feedback, but there's some pretty cool characters, some of which we already know and some of which are original from this game. And it also has some pretty cool lore that is actually also hinted at in the remake project. So it definitely makes sense to catch up on it if you plan to play the remake. Next, there's Crisis Core, which is a prequel to the original Final Fantasy VII. It was released in 2007, originally only for PSP, but the game was remastered in 2022. Which that remastered is available on pretty much all major platforms. This game has amazing story, really great characters, and some really cool new lore and perspective on the Final Fantasy VII world that we didn't get before this game. Also one of the most beloved games, and I think for a reason. So I think you should definitely check this one out. Now let's get to the Remake Trilogy. First off, Final Fantasy VII Remake. It was released in 2020 and it's available on PlayStation, Xbox, PC and Switch too. It is very faithful to the spirit of Final Fantasy VII, but it does expand and enhance the original game as well as its story. For example, the combat is actually action focused, but it does retain command aspects from the OG. So it's basically a hybrid action turn-based combat. Story-wise, it's much closer to a retelling or a reimagining than something like a remastered. The game overall is a more linear experience, with some smaller open areas, but do not expect an open world like in the original game yet. However, the next game in the Remake Trilogy does have an open world. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. It was released in 2024. It's available on PlayStation, Xbox, PC and Switch too. It's pretty much the same as Remake regarding like faithfulness and things like that, but with an open world. In general, I would say the main difference is the freedom. There's more freedom in the combat, with side content and side quests. In general, you're a lot more free to choose how and when you want to do things. Lastly, for the Final Fantasy VII Remake Trilogy, Final Fantasy VII Revelation. The game is scheduled to release in spring of 2027, so I can't speak on any specifics yet, but what I can say is that the game will be available on all platforms from release. If I had to guess how the game will evolve from Rebirth, if you look at the step from Remake to Rebirth, I think the step from Rebirth to Revelation will be similar. So my prediction is a more evolved combat with even more expansion, as well as even a bit more freedom than Rebirth. But that's just a prediction. We'll know exactly how it will be compared when the game actually releases. But now for some additional stuff to know about, some additional games, media, etc. I want to start with Before Crisis, which is a mobile game from 2004. It is also a prequel to the original Final Fantasy, and it does have, I think, a bunch of interesting bits of lore. But it's very hard to actually play it now from my experience, because it was only a mobile game and it never actually had a Western release, and eventually it also got end of serviced, so it's pretty much lost media at this point. However, you can probably find it on YouTube if you wanna dive into the lore of it. Then there's Last Order. That is an anime movie, but this movie is not canon, which is why I would say it is very optional. The movie got some very negative feedback when it released, which is why they redid the Nibelheim incident in Crisis Core. And that ended up becoming canon, and The Last Order was basically retconned. That's why it's very optional, and if you want to leave something out, I think Last Order is one of the first ones that you can turn to if you're not really that interested in it. Next we have a book. On the Way to a Smile is a collection of short stories which is very much worth to look into. It plays after the original game and before Advent Children. It is kind of like a lead up to Advent Children, so if you want to prepare for the movie, that's a great way to do it. Now let's get to Final Fantasy VII The First Soldier. There's actually kind of two things that are called that. The first is a battle royale game. So basically Square Enix thought, oh, we also want to make a battle royale game, so they made a Final Fantasy VII themed one. And that game was okay, but it was only on mobile, so I never really could get into it much, because I suck at using screens for gaming. But sadly that game didn't last super long. I think the amount of people who like both Battle Royale games and Final Fantasy and also play on mobile just probably wasn't enough. So that game was end of serviced a bit after release. I don't know how long exactly it lasted, I think it was like a year or something. It didn't feel very long, sadly. But There's also another thing that's called the First Soldier, and that is a part of Final Fantasy VII Ever Crisis, which is a recent mobile game, a gacha game that retells the original story and also Crisis Core. And there's also a new story in it, which is called The First Soldier. And that story actually has a lot of amazing, really cool lore. And like, there's a lot of cool, interesting characters, and you get a bit of background on Sephiroth too. But sadly, as many other games that Square Enix has made, mobile games specifically I'm talking about, it gets end of service in October of 2026. So if you watch this video now, there is still a chance that you can play this game, but I'm gonna try to find some videos to future-proof this video so you can watch the story, because I think it's actually really cool. There's some really cool stuff in there. For example, lore on Sephiroth's sword, stuff like that. It's really cool. It's very sad that it's getting end of serviced, but that is the fate of mobile games, I guess. But a big recommendation if you want to get into the remake, because the remake picks up a bunch of aspects from that story. So big recommend from my side. Now I have another 2 books that I want to talk about. I don't know if they're actually officially related as like prequel and sequel to each other, but I kind of think of them that way. So what I'm talking about is Traces of Two Pasts and Dear Destiny, because both of those books explore the heroines Tifa and Aerith. Traces of Two Pasts already has an English version, and Dear Destiny is getting one in January of 2027. Both of the books are, okay, well, I haven't read the second actually, because I'm waiting for the official translation. But what I can say about the first book is it's really, really cool. It's a really cool look at Tifa and Aerith. If you like those characters, this is a must read. It's really cool to get a bit of background and backstory for the both of them. So it's a really, really cool book. Big recommendation from me too. There's a lot of cool stuff in the compilation. So I think I've covered everything that I wanted to cover now. So now I'm gonna get into my recommended order. And first of all, I'm gonna tell you about the one that I did and that I've seen friends of mine do too, and I think it works really, really well, especially if you, like from a today's perspective, I think this one is the one that works the best, which is starting with Final Fantasy VII Remake as an introduction. The devs have kind of talked about how Remake is an introduction for people. They wanted to bring new gamers into that world of Final Fantasy VII. And that's why it works super well as an introduction. There is elements of mystery that you might not get, that someone who knows the original will understand, but I think that's intentional. It's supposed to get you interested in the rest of this world, in the original and all the additional stuff. Which is why, after you have finished Remake, I think you should go play the original and then all the other additional stuff that you are interested in. I think especially relevant to the rest of the trilogy are Crisis Core, especially because of the main character, then Advent Children, because the devs have talked a bunch about how it kind of matters to the Remake Trilogy in some kind of way. They've been not super clear about it, but it's come up a lot in interviews and stuff, so I think it's worth knowing. And they showed it again in theaters before Rebirth, so there's a big argument there that maybe they didn't only want it to promote Rebirth, but they also wanted people to know about Advent Children before going into Rebirth. I think Dirge of Cerberus with some of the lore is also pretty relevant. Traces of Two Pasts also. I can't confidently speak on Dear Destiny, but I would assume that it also, same as Traces of Two Pasts, would be good to read before diving further in. And also Ever Crisis, specifically The First Soldier. Its story would also gets referenced, so it's pretty relevant to the Remake Trilogy. And then I would play Rebirth and eventually Revelation. So basically play Remake, then all the other stuff, and then finish the Remake Trilogy. It's kind of how I did it, with some exceptions. Obviously, I played some stuff that released after Rebirth, after it released, but this is how I think I would always recommend to a newcomer who asks me, how should I get into this? This would be my first answer most of the time. However, there is also a few other ways that also make sense, a few alternatives that you could also do. For example, the original first, then all the additional media, and then play the Remake Trilogy. Though I think this one will be tough if you don't like retro games. Because I think if you get into Remake, you're already like into this world, you know the characters, then it will be far easier for you to get into the original. If you don't like retro games, like even if you don't like retro games, if you're already invested in these characters, it'll be much easier to get into the original. But I think playing the OG first, there's an argument to be made that if you like retro, it could be better, because, you know, obviously they also made the remake for fans of the original. So if you get into it like that, like people who played the original first, the old-time fans basically, that also makes a lot of sense. Lastly, if you want a less time-consuming way, I think it would also make sense to only play the Remake Trilogy. Obviously, you will miss out on a bunch of additional lore and stuff like that, but I think the Remake Trilogy is also made for people who are new and just want to play that. So I think that's also a very valid way of playing it, especially if you don't have a lot of time, you can't get into all these games, or you don't like retro games at all, because, you know, everyone has their preferences. So I think only playing the Remake Trilogy, so pretty much Remake, Rebirth, and then Revelation, that also works pretty well, I think. In the end, I want to say, obviously, you can play however you want. Like, if something super unorthodox catches your interest, like if you hear this one title and you're like, oh man, I want to play this first, this sounds so cool. Obviously, it might take away things from the other games, but that doesn't mean it will worsen your experience. It'll definitely change it, but I don't think there's a wrong way to enjoy media or art like video games. So in the end, you can do whatever you want, but I think it's good to just educate yourself, and I hope I helped you with that. Let me know if I missed anything, let me know if I helped you with this, and let me know how you're gonna play it, if you got into it because of my video or with the help of my video. Or if you've played the games, what order did you play them in, and what do you think is the best order to play them in? Feel free to join my Discord server, I will leave it in the description. Also, follow my Twitch, I do stream there sometimes, especially watch parties of things like the Game Awards or Summer Games Fest. Subscribe and like this video to find a memory of a past life. I'm MacLeod and I will see you next time. Goodbye for now.